Hello, and welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership. I am thrilled to introduce myself as the new host of the podcast. My name is Will Houghteling, and I am Franklin Covey's Executive Vice President of Product. Prior to joining Franklin Covey, I was an entrepreneur starting my own company called Strive. I was a business builder, having helped create a university from scratch, and I was a leader at Google and YouTube, where I helped build educational products to reach, teach, and transform the lives of tens of millions of people around the world. I'm incredibly excited to host On Leadership. My goal with this podcast is in 30 minutes or so a week to help you take insights from some of the world's greatest leaders so you can go back to your teams and improve the performance and purpose of your organization. I hope you leave these conversations feeling both informed and inspired. I'm thrilled today to introduce our guest, Kim Scott. Kim is the author of the internationally best-selling book, Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity. And more recently, she published Radical Respect, How to Work Together Better. Kim has coached C-suite executives from Dropbox to Qualtrics to X and many other tech companies and co-founded the company Radical Candor. She was faculty at Apple University and led multiple teams at Google before that. Kim Scott, welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Will.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. So at Franklin Covey, we believe that leadership development happens inside out, that really to sustainably kind of change your performance, you need to focus on who you are, then how you think, and then what you do. I've read your books. I've heard you speak many times before, but I don't know a ton about Kim Scott, the person. So I'd actually like to start with a little Oprah moment of, if you could give me a window into your kind of formative experience that led you to become the person you are today. Is there someone or something that greatly impacted you on your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So my whole career in business actually was one giant plan to subsidize my novel writing habit. So kind of an unusual reason to go to business school, but there it is. So when I was in high school, I was invited to go on a trip to Omaha, Nebraska with the U.S. Air Force. And they did an in-air refueling. It was one of these really cool trips that the Air Force does to sort of help educate people about why they're doing what they're doing. And on this trip, this general stood up and he explained why it was important for us to have, this was 1989, by the way, so just to orient you in time, why it was important for the U.S. to have enough nuclear weapons to blow the world up 4 times, because once was not enough, given the Soviet threat. And of course, this seemed to me ridiculous. And I thought, in order to understand this problem, it's not enough to understand sort of the politics of the situation. I need to understand Russian culture and American culture. So I studied Russian literature and American literature in college. And then I moved to what was then the Soviet Union, and it was there that I had my very first management experience. I was working for a New York-based diamond company, and my job was to hire these diamond cutters to work in a diamond cutting factory, to cut and polish rough stones into jewels. And so I thought this was going to be easy because at the time the ruble was collapsing. I had dollars. I was like, business is easy. It's just about paying people, and it's easy for me to pay these people a lot more. But they didn't take the job. They wanted a picnic. And when I took them on the picnic, we got most of the way through a bottle of vodka. And then I realized that the thing that I could offer them that the state could not offer them was not so much money, but to give a damn about them at a personal level, to care personally. And that was the moment when I realized that management is actually really interesting. Leading people is really interesting. I went on to come back to the States and to go to business school, and then to work for a couple of startups which failed, and then I wound up working at Google. That worked out much better than the failed startups. And I got to a point after about 5.5 years in my career at Google that I realized the thing that I really cared about was not cost per click, which was going really well, but actually kind of boring. But what I cared about was how do you build an organization so that people can do the best work of their lives, and more importantly, build the best relationships of their careers. And there wasn't a job at Google that allowed me to focus on that. But right at this time, my favorite business school professor had left Harvard and joined Apple. And he went to work for Steve Jobs, who wanted to throw away all of their management training and start from a blank piece of paper. And my professor, Richard Tudlow, called me up and he said, Kim, you got to come and help us do this because, I'm a great professor, but I never managed anybody really. And so I went to Apple and worked with a great team of people to design and teach this class called Managing at Apple. And then a friend of mine from Google, Dick Costolo, had become CEO of Twitter. And he said, why don't you come and help me design and teach managing at Twitter? And of course, managing at Twitter was the exact same thing as managing at Apple or managing in a warehouse. Like no matter what kind of work you're doing, the core aspects, I believe, of management are the same. You've got to create this culture of feedback. You've got to learn how to solicit feedback as well as give it. That's thing number one. Thing number two is you've got to build a great team. And thing number three, of course, is you've got to set goals and achieve them. And that's kind of true everywhere. And the hard part about doing those things are the people, the parts, not so much the goal-setting parts. And I wound up becoming Dick's CEO coach and writing Radical Candor, and the rest is history.
Wonderful. I love the backstory. Thank you. So teaching leadership at Apple must have been a fascinating experience because I feel like Steve Jobs breaks a lot of the rules, or maybe he doesn't. So maybe tell me and our audience kind of what Steve Jobs' management approach was like and how that did or didn't influence what you ended up teaching in Radical Candor.
Yeah. So I think that he's a complicated, like all of us, he's complicated. And there's no one right way to interpret him. But here were the things that I saw at Apple. And by the time I got to Apple, by the way, he had gone out on medical leave. So I didn't get to work personally with him, but I worked with a lot of people who did work very closely with him. And I think he has this reputation for being this top-down dictatorial leader. And I don't think that's exactly right. There's a wonderful interview with him on NPR where he says, at Apple, we hire people who tell us what to do, not the other way around. And that, I think, is really important. We don't think of Steve Jobs as like a humble guy, but he often said, and he did a lot of things that showed that this wasn't just words. He said, I don't care so much about being right. What I want is for us to do the right thing. And for that, he needed people who were going to push back on him. Now, he was not like one of these, what I call in the book, a quiet listener. He was a loud listener. Yeah. So one person said of him that he's a lion, and if he roars at you, he expects and wants you to roar back, but you better be prepared for a counter roar. And I saw this a lot. There was one story of someone who had worked for Steve and gotten in an argument with him about a particular technology that they were going to use in a new launch. And he argued once, he argued twice, he argued a third time. And finally, he just gave up. He figured, well, it's his company, we'll do it his way. And it emerged after the product launched that he was right and Steve was wrong. And Steve came charging into his office and he said, why do we do this? And the guy was like, well, because you said. And Steve looked at him and he said, and it was your job to convince me that I was wrong and you failed. So that's an example of extremely loud listening and not something that I think everybody can emulate. But it worked for him because he surrounded himself with people who were not afraid to push back.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing. I love those stories of kind of the inner workings of some of these kind of iconic leaders. So your book, Radical Candor, in the last 10 years has really become a canonical leadership text. And I think that it is on the bookshelves of many of the leaders that I grew up with. I started my career at Google and YouTube. I was there for many years. obviously where you are as well. And it has become one of the de facto leadership books in Silicon Valley and now the world more broadly. For those who have not read, could you give a brief synopsis? It's now one of the world's best 2x2 matrices. So
Sure.
Your business school professor must be very proud.
I hope so. So radical candor, and by the way, sometimes when people hear the title and they know nothing more, they'll use it as an excuse to act like a jerk. Sometimes I'll be working with a team and someone will charge into a conference room and they'll say, the spirit of radical candor. And then they will act like a garden variety jerk. And that is not the spirit of radical candor. That is the spirit of what I call obnoxious aggression. So if that's happening in your organization, I apologize. Feel free to call it compassionate candor. That might be more clear. So what do I mean by radical candor? Radical candor is what happens when you care personally and you challenge directly at the same time. And as I mentioned, I went to business school. And at business school, I learned exactly nothing about managing people, soliciting feedback, let alone giving it. But I did learn one important thing. I learned that all of life's hardest problems can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. So think about radical candor as the vertical line is care personally, and the horizontal line is challenge directly. And when you're in the upper right-hand quadrant, whereas where you always want to be in a 2x2 framework, that's radical candor. There are times, of course, when all of us remember to challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And this is what I call obnoxious aggression. That's what's in the lower right-hand quadrant. And obnoxious aggression, is kind of a fancy word, fancy phrase maybe for saying the asshole quadrant. And in fact, in the first draft of the book, that is what I called it. But I quit doing that for a really important reason. I found that when I did that, people would use this framework to write names in boxes. And I beg of you who are listening, please don't use this framework or these words that way. These are not judgments of other people. This is not another Myers-Briggs personality test. These are descriptions of mistakes that all of us make multiple times a day. So instead, think about this framework like a compass to guide specific conversations with specific people to a better place. Now, obnoxious aggression is a huge problem. It is a problem mostly because it hurts other people. It's also a problem because it's inefficient. Because if I'm a big jerk to you, if I start yelling at you, then you're likely to go into fight or flight mode. And then you literally physically cannot hear the words that are coming out of my mouth. So I'm just wasting my breath. Totally a waste of time. It's also a problem for maybe a more subtle reason. Because I don't know about you, but for me, when I realize I've acted like a jerk, it's not my instinct to go the right way on care personally, which is what I should do. Instead, it's my instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly. And then I wind up in the worst place of all, manipulative insincerity, where I sort of back off, and now I'm no longer caring or challenging. If obnoxious aggression is front stabbing, manipulative insincerity is backstabbing. It's where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, all of the kinds of things that may sort of erode trust most quickly in the workplace or in any other relationship creep in. And, it's kind of fun to tell stories about manipulative insincerity and obnoxious aggression. If you watch The Office or sort of any workplace drama show, you're going to see a lot of episodes about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity. However, the problem is, and it's natural that happens because that's where the drama is, and usually the humor too. But the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes not in obnoxious aggression or manipulative insincerity, but in this last upper left-hand quadrant, which is what I call ruinous empathy. Ruinous empathy is what happens when you do show that you care personally, but you fail to challenge directly. Usually just because you're trying to be nice. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings or you don't want to offend them, and so you don't tell them something that they would be better off knowing in the long run. And this is the mistake that I am really determined to help people correct, because I think it's the thing that most of us struggle with most of the time. I don't know. What do you think?
That absolutely resonates with me. And I have, as you were going through these different quadrants, I was thinking about the moments in my career or even the moments in my last 2 weeks where I've been in each of them. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate your line that this is not a personality test. We are not always in one quadrant. It's a state versus trait, different relationships, different moments. We exist in different parts of the quadrant, different parts of the 2x2. Have you always been radically candid?
No.
What caused you to wake up and realize, shoot, I'm operating too much in this zone or this zone?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the most painful moments in my career explains really why I wrote the book. Because I'll tell you one story, but I have thousands of stories just like this, unfortunately. But this is the Bob story. This is my sort of ruinous empathy, maybe with a dash of manipulative insincerity story. And by the way, as I'm telling my story, if folks who are listening can think about their own story, and because I promise everyone has these stories, and give it a title, and then the next time you're in a situation where you know you should say the thing, but you're tempted not to say the thing, think of the title of your story, and that will help you say the right thing.
I love that
will help
advice.
you say what needs
That's
to
great.
be said. So this is what really helped me. So I had just hired this guy, we'll call him Bob, and I really liked Bob a lot. He was smart, he was charming, he was funny. He would do stuff like we were at a manager offsite playing one of those endless get-to-know-you games, and everybody was getting more and more and more stressed out. It was a startup, we were busy, and Bob was the guy who had the courage to raise his hand and to say, I can tell everyone's stressed out and wants to get back to work or maybe get home, and I've got an idea. It'll help us get to know each other, and it'll be really fast. Whatever his idea was, if it was fast, we were down with it. And then Bob said, let's go around the table and confess to one another what candy our parents used when potty training us. Really weird,
M&Ms.
really fast. And all of us had parents who bribed us with candy to learn how to use the toilet. And we all remembered what that candy was. Hershey Kisses, right here for me. And so a little weird, a little quirky, but kind of funny, and then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would pull out just the right piece of candy for the right person at the right moment. And so Bob brought a little levity to the office. Everybody loved working with Bob. There was just one problem with Bob. He was doing terrible work, absolutely terrible work. I was so puzzled. I couldn't understand what was going on because he had this incredible resume, this great history of accomplishments. I learned much later that the problem was that he was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day, which maybe explained all that candy that he had all the time. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is that Bob was handing work into me with shame in his eyes. And I would say something to him along the lines of, oh, Bob, you are so awesome. We all love working with you. This is a great start. Maybe you can make it just a little bit better, which, of course, he never did. So let's double click. Why did I say that to Bob? Why did I say something like that to Bob? Part of it was truly ruinous empathy. I really did like him, and I really did not want to hurt his feelings. But if I'm honest with myself, there was something more insidious going on because Bob was popular and Bob was also sensitive. And there was part of me that was afraid if I explained to Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, that he might get upset. He might even start to cry. And then everyone would think I was a big you-know-what. So the part of me that was worried about Bob's feelings, that was the ruinous empathy. The part of me that was worried about my reputation as a leader, that was the manipulative insincerity part. And this went on for 10 months. And eventually the inevitable happened. And I realized that if I didn't fire Bob, I was going to lose all my best performers because not only had I been unfair to Bob not to tell him that his work wasn't nearly good enough, I'd been unfair to the whole team. And everyone was frustrated. Everyone else's deliverables were late when Bob's deliverables were late. Other people on the team were not able to spend as much time as they needed to doing their work because they were having to spend so much time redoing Bob's work. And the people on the team who were best at the job, they really wanted to do the best work of their lives, and they were going to quit. They were going to go work someplace where a leader was creating the conditions for them to do the best work of their lives. And so I sat down to have the conversation with Bob that I should have begun, frankly, 10 months previously. And when I did, he pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye, and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." And now I realize that by not telling Bob, thinking I was being so nice, I'm having to fire him as a result. Not so nice after all. It was a terrible moment. It was really bad for me. It was much worse for Bob, obviously. It was bad for the whole team. It was bad for our relationships. Everybody was frustrated with everybody. And it was bad for our investors. We were not getting the kind of results that we could have been getting otherwise. And yet at that, it was too late to say Bob in that moment. Even Bob agreed he should go because his reputation on the team was just shot. All I could do in that moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again, and that I would do everything in my power to help other people avoid making that mistake, because it's so painful for all of us. And that was probably the moment where I started thinking about this, but I didn't have the words for it until I saw that was the sort of negative story. Until I saw it being done right, I didn't really have the words or really the understanding of how to fix that problem.
Yeah, I love that story. I'm sure that everybody listening who has ever gone through the difficult experience of laying someone off can resonate with that story, because in those moments where you feel racked with guilt about having to let someone go, you think to yourselves, what could I have done beforehand to have avoided getting to this moment? And often it's, wow, along the way, there was feedback that I could have given and maybe could have helped this person, but I felt like I was being nice, but actually it was doing no service to them to hold back on the feedback that I did have. So I think that's such a great story.
And it's not only in management. I mean, it's also in our personal lives. In fact, I wouldn't be married to my husband right now if it weren't for having learned about radical candor. Because, there were moments when we started dating where he did something that I didn't like, and my instinct was just never to see him again. And then I realized, or I could tell him, and then we could have another date. So, it's really important, I think, in all our relationships.
Yeah, I had a coach many years ago who used to repeat the mantra, approach, don't avoid. Approach to give the feedback rather than avoiding it. And at Franklin Covey, we have a solution, navigating difficult conversations, and we talk about the importance of balancing courage and consideration. I think this is it's such an important leadership lesson. So Radical Candor was this absolute hit, global best-selling book. You last year published your second book, Radical Respect. What drove you to write a second book, to follow it up? What do you feel like you didn't get across in Radical Candor that you wanted to follow up with?
So if you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And indeed, I did. And hands down, the best feedback came when I was giving a Radical Candor talk at a tech company in San Francisco. And the CEO of that company had been a colleague of mine for the better part of a decade at Google, somebody I like and respect enormously. And so I was really excited to give this talk to her team. And when I finished giving the talk, she pulled me aside and she said, "Kim, I'm really excited to roll out Radical Candor. I think it's going to help me build the kind of innovative culture that I want to build. But I got to tell you, it's much harder for me to roll it out than it is for you." And she went on to explain to me that as soon as she would give people even the most gentle, compassionate criticism, that they would call her an angry Black woman. And I knew this was true, and I knew how unfair that is, because she's one of the most cheerful, reasonable people that I've ever worked with. And this made me have 4 different realizations all at the same time. And these became sort of the core 4 chapters of the next book, in fact. The first thing I realized was that I had failed to be an upstander. I'd failed even to notice the extent to which she had to show up unfailingly cheerful and pleasant in every meeting we had ever been in together, even though she had what to be ticked off about, as we all do from time to time at work. And I just had not, I think of myself as the kind of colleague who would notice something like that and intervene in some way, but I had failed to do that. The second thing that I realized was that not only had I been in denial about the kinds of things that were happening to her, I was also in denial about the kinds of things that were happening to me. I had gone through my whole career pretending that a whole host of disrespectful attitudes and behaviors had not been coming my way, even though they had been. And I think I did that because, like a lot of people, I never wanted to think of myself as a victim. I want to think of myself, as having agency. And so I pretended that all these things were not happening, that were in fact happening. And this caused, me to sort of default to silence instead of choosing a response, which is not how the author of Radical Candor I think of myself as a speak up kind of person. Now, the third thing that I realized was that I was probably most deeply in denial, not about the times when I was the one who was, sort of on the receiving end of disrespect, but when I was on the giving end, when I was the one who had said or done the disrespectful thing. Because as much as I didn't want to think of myself as a culprit, even less did I want to think of myself as as little as I wanted to think of myself as the victim, even less did I want to think of myself as the culprit. So that was a big drink of water. But then there was this fourth thing. Like, as a leader, I envision that I'm creating these BS-free zones where everybody can do the best work of their life and build the best relationships of their career. But I realized that by pretending these disrespectful attitudes and behaviors were not happening on my team, that were in fact happening on my team, that I was not being the kind of leader that I needed to be. I needed to prevent these things from happening in order to create the kind of environment that I wanted to. So anyway, that made me sort of sit down and think about what is respect, what is disrespect, what causes disrespect. I don't think most people intend to be disrespectful, but we are all the time. And what can we do about it? What can we do differently as leaders? What can we do differently to be upstanders and not silent bystanders? What can we do when we're on the receiving end? And perhaps most difficult of all, what can we do when we're the ones who are disrespectful, which we all are from time to time.
You shared earlier that a common misperception misperception of radical candor is that you're actually encouraging people to obnoxious aggression, that they misinterpret the title of the book, and that maybe you should have called it compassionate candor instead. What's a misinterpretation of radical respect? What have you seen so far?
Well, it's really interesting. Actually, the first, the hardcover version of this book came out under the title Just Work. And people misinterpreted it as a return to office book, which it is not. I think that another, radical respect, or actually it was Just Work, it was a hardcover, was in fact banned from the library at the Naval Academy. And I cannot understand why we're at this moment in time when we are banning books. That is not who we are as a country. So that is, I don't know if that's a misinterpretation of the book. I just think that's a moment in time of the book. I think also people sometimes think about this book as something that's going to help some people and hurt other people. But radical respect, it needs to be universal. Respect has 2 different definitions, and it's worth kind of double clicking on them because they're 2 very different definitions. definitions, and I'm talking about one, not the other. One definition, the one I'm not talking about in the book, is that respect is something that one has to earn by proving one's skills at something or other. That's not what I'm talking about. The second definition of respect is the unconditional regard that we owe each other for our shared humanity. And that is universal. We all need to make sure that we are listening to. The point of being on a team is to collaborate. And if we don't respect one another, we're not going to care about each other, and we're not going to bother challenging one another. And so in order for radical candor to work, you need this baseline of respect.
Lovely. So switching gears a bit to talk about leadership in the future, you recently partnered with Google Labs to create a portrait, which is an AI avatar of Kim Scott that people can practice difficult conversations with. I did it myself. It was a fascinating experience. I went in and talked, and it was a real preview of speaking to you on today's podcast. You are the rare thought leader at the intersection of leadership and technology, given your background. So I'm curious, how do you think AI will change leadership over the course of the next few years?
AI is going to change leadership if we can learn how to manage AI and not allow AI to manage us. And one of the things that I really love about the portrait experiment that Google Labs is doing, and it's not going to be just me, there's going to be lots of portraits, and maybe the portraits can argue with each other even in a radically candid way.
Our portraits could interview each other, and then we both won't even...
Yeah, you can have, we all talk about wanting this personal board of directors, and with the portraits, you could have a pretty cool board of directors and ask them questions and listen to them discuss and debate. And the great thing that, here's what I hope will happen with AI, which it's not inevitable. This will only happen if we do things. And we're going to need a partnership we're going to need some regulation, as well as great big businesses. And big tech has got to be big for large language models to work. But at the same time, there need to be rules of the game. Otherwise, we're going to get least common denominator AI. So one of the things that can happen with AI is that it can be easier to go deep and to ask questions of experts. I think that the promise of Google Labs portraits is that you can ask specific people things and get specific answers. I think sometimes the danger of just going to a large language model is that it can feel like a young child who is so excited about all the colors, they're mixing them all together, and they just wind up with kind of a gray sludge instead of all the bright colors. Like you need specific knowledge from specific people. And I may be wrong. I mean, I think Franklin Covey and I share this management philosophy that telling people what to do doesn't work. You need to build trust rather than be kind of a strong man. But there are other people who disagree, and I think disagreement is good. So what we don't want is kind of one answer. We want different answers, and we want to be able to discuss and debate in the best sense of the word, not in the high school debate sense of the word, but we want to have radically candid discussions and disagreements. So that's one possibility of the portrait. The other reason why I was so excited about the portrait is that it gives me time to go write the next book. I mean, when I wrote Radical Candor, I wrote it because I'm a human being. I don't scale. I could only coach at most 5 people at a time before I started neglecting 1 or 2 of them. And yet I had a lot of people coming saying, will you be my coach? And I hate saying no to people. And so I said, well, I'll just write it down everything I think, and then they can read the book. And that solved the problem for a little bit. And then I found now that once the book started doing well, there were even more people asking me questions. And they just wanted 15 minutes of my time. But I found that if I said yes to all those people, I was neglecting my children and my next book. And now the portrait can answer everybody's individual question, and it does a really good job. It's not perfect, but sometimes it does it better. It's way more succinct than I am. It doesn't get long-winded. It's the way you see me doing right now. So I love that about the portrait. And then the last thing I think that is really has great potential is to start having. We can teach these different portraits and even the different AIs to have discussion that really looks for the truth. Steve Jobs tells the metaphor of a rock tumbler that debate on a team is how we get to the best answer. And the thing that hurts debate on a team are the hurt feelings, really. And the AI won't have that. So we can teach the AI to have what's often called a Rogerian argument, where it listens to the other. It's able to articulate the argument of the other person and its own argument, and they can even swap roles. So we can teach AI to help us get to the truth. And I do this sometimes when I'm faced with an answer from one AI that seems like it might be hallucination. I'll copy paste it and put it into another AI, and I'll say to Gemini, ChatGPT said this, what do you think? And it'll explain to me what it thinks and why ChatGPT had a different set of assumptions. It's really interesting. So I'm excited about the possibility of AI, but I also acknowledge that there's a million potential problems with it. And one thing I didn't say about my career is I did spend my first job out of business school was at the Federal Communications Commission in 1996, and we made a big mistake. That was when the Telecommunications Act of 1996 was passed, and we promised never to regulate tech. And we need some regulation, I believe. I think we made a mistake then.
Well, fascinating. I think a lot of different topics you touched on, we absolutely agree with here. If I can cover, I think the importance of opinionated AI that is trained on a trusted corpus of content that is built on real foundational research-backed, evidence-based principles. We built out an AI coach at Franklin Covey that's trained on Franklin Covey's corpus of 7 habits and leading at the speed of trust, et cetera, and not totally dissimilar from the AI, from the portrait that you've built with Google Labs, obviously trained on your corpus. I think the ability for AI to provide personalized, scalable support. Not everybody, very few people can be fortunate enough to have Kim Scott as a coach, but anybody can talk to the AI portrait version of Kim Scott.
Democratizes.
Exactly, absolutely. Democratizes in a really important way. So that's great. I'd love to move to a lightning round as we're coming to our close.
All right.
So I have a few questions that we'll hopefully be able to touch through quickly. I saw online that you are a big hiker and backpacker. We're entering the summer, people are thinking about their summer travel plans. What is your national park recommendation for people this summer?
I'm going to hike up. I don't know if I'll make it all the way to the summit of Mauna Kea on the Big Island in Hawaii, but I'm going to go as far as I can. The Big Island in Hawaii, you can go swimming in the morning and you can be up in the snow in the afternoon. It's incredible. It's the tallest mountain, I think, in the United States is Mauna Kea.
Amazing.
So that's an awesome one. And then I'm also going to go backpacking in Yosemite, which is it's breathtaking. And the sort of the majesty of the mountains and the open land is something that I am always deeply grateful to in this country. And some of the other, we should talk about some of the other beautiful, beautiful national parks in Utah. Utah has some of the most stunning scenery in the world. So
Absolutely.
Maybe I'll come visit you next.
Absolutely. We'll do the next podcast in person.
That would be great.
You started the podcast saying that you went to business school to fund a dream of writing a novel. A lot of people traveling this summer will have some beach time. Is there any novel you would recommend that people read this summer?
Absolutely. Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Such a great book, such a great novel. And, if you're interested in radical candor, I did write a novel called Virtual Love. I self-published it. I can't get anybody to publish it. So if you're a publisher and you want to publish one of my novels, give me a call. But
always be closing. I like it.
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon, Virtual Love. There's also The Measurement Problem, which maybe seems more relevant now than when I wrote it. Back in 1990. The Measurement Problem is it's a love story, but thematically it's a lighthearted critique of capitalism, which is that capitalism is really good at rewarding what it can measure and really bad at rewarding what we value. I don't know what the solution is to that, but the problem was fun to articulate in fiction.
So going from fiction to nonfiction, you obviously have an amazing book, Radical Candor, everybody should read. Is there another leadership book that you find yourself recommending regularly?
So I'm gonna give you an answer and kind of an orthogonal answer. The orthogonal answer is that I think that most leaders should read more fiction. If there's one thing that I have found in my life that really builds the empathy muscle, which I think is important. You don't want ruinous empathy, but you do want compassionate candor, and you can't be compassionate without some empathy. It's really getting inside another person's mind and understanding how they are living their lives. And so I recommend fiction. Probably one of my favorite writers of all time is Toni Morrison. Try The Bluest Eye, try Song of Solomon. Such great novels, and they will really help you understand what it's like to live inside another person's head. Not just a mile in their shoes, but 20 hours in their head. So that's one answer. I think that another great book about management that I admire is Amy Edmondson's The Fearless Organization, and also her new book, The Right Kind of Wrong. Love those books. It's all about sort of how you have to create psychological safety, and it all starts with soliciting feedback, with being willing to be wrong, being willing to change your mind. Excellent.
Well, people have a full Kindle after this conversation, or a full backpack for their travels. So thank you so much for the recommendations. To close, we obviously are a leadership company, and I would love to know, who is a leader that has greatly impacted you, and what lesson did you learn from them?
When people ask me that question, I have to say that the people I've learned the most from are the people who worked for me, not the people who were above me. And I think I learned the most from them, because they're brilliant, but also because the people who, if you're a leader, the people who are working for you are watching you more closely than just about anyone in your life, except maybe your parents. And they really care about what you're doing. And if you can ask them for feedback, you'll learn a lot. So one of the leaders who I learned the most from was Russ Laraway, who worked for me at Google, and then who we co-founded a company together, so we became partners. And you should always be a partner with the people who, up, down, and sideways. It's really about getting on a level playing field. And Russ has another great book that everyone should read, which is called When They Win, You Win.
Wonderful. All right, I'll add that to my reading list for the summer as well.
All right.
Kim Scott, thank you so much for joining us on Franklin Covey on Leadership. It was fascinating to hear more about some of the stories behind the book and the famous 2x2 that I've heard about and read about so much before. We really appreciate the insights, and for our audience, we hope you join us next week for another episode of On Leadership.